Get him out of here. The order cut through the room before the music could finish its sentence. 2 security guards had their hands locked around an old man's arms, dragging him down the aisle while Dean Martin was still singing. The man didn't fight, didn't protest. He walked the way someone walks when they've learned resistance only makes it worse. Dean saw it mid-lyric. His mouth closed. The word died before it could land. The band carried him for 2 confused bars, piano, bass, brushes, then collapsed into silence like a building that realized too late it had no support. 2,400 people froze. No applause. No laughter. No clink of glass. Just a room full of breath held too long. Dean stood at center stage, microphone loose in his hand, eyes locked on the back of the Copa room. The guards were moving fast now, steering the old man past tables, past cocktails, past faces that didn't quite register what they were seeing. Because men like him were usually removed quietly. Through corridors. Through doors meant not to be noticed. Tonight, they were making sure he was. The old man's suit was worn but clean. His shoes were polished thin. His head stayed down. Not in shame, in habit. Dean knew that posture. The guards didn't look angry. They looked bored. This wasn't personal. It was policy. Someone near the front laughed, thinking the pause was a joke. It died immediately. Ken Lane's hands hovered over the piano keys. The drummer held his sticks in midair. Nobody moved because nobody knew who was allowed to move first. Dean took 1 step forward. In the wings, Herman Citron felt his stomach drop. This was not in the program. Dean Martin was the safest man in Las Vegas. The reliable one. The smooth one. The man who never made management nervous. He didn't rant. He didn't challenge. He sang, smiled, cashed the check, and went home. That was the deal. And deals were sacred in this town. The guards reached the aisle's end. One of them tightened his grip, urging the old man faster. The man stumbled, caught himself, nodded once, apologetic as if this were somehow his fault. Dean's jaw tightened. He remembered a different hallway. A different voice telling his father to speak English if he wanted service. Remembered the silence afterward. The way humiliation didn't shout, it waited. The manager leaned toward Herman, whispering sharply. Get him back on the song. Herman scribbled on a cocktail napkin with shaking fingers. Finish the show. Don't make trouble. Ken caught the note during the dead air, passed it back without looking. Dean read it. Then he looked up again. The old man was almost at the doors now. Almost erased. Dean thought of Sammy. Thought of back doors and loading docks. Thought of applause that ended at the edge of a casino floor. Thought of how many times he'd watched it happen and told himself this wasn't the moment. Every time, it was never the moment. Dean lifted the microphone. The room leaned toward him as one. Hold it. The words were calm. Not loud. Not angry. They landed like glass breaking. The guards stopped. The old man looked up for the first time. Dean pointed, not accusatory, not dramatic, just precise. That man's name is Willie Hayes. A ripple moved through the audience. Confusion first. Then curiosity. Curiosity was dangerous. He played piano in this building when it opened, Dean said. Before most of you knew this place existed. One of the guards shifted his weight. The manager took a step onto the stage, then stopped. Every instinct told him this was getting expensive. Willie's mouth opened slightly. He hadn't expected to be seen. That was clear. He came in tonight to look around, Dean continued. That's it. The room was silent enough to hear ice melting. And for that, Dean said, eyes never leaving the guards, he's being dragged out like he did something wrong. The manager cleared his throat. Mr. Martin, we can? Dean turned his head just enough to acknowledge him. Not enough to give ground. No, he said. We're doing this now. This wasn't defiance. It was finality. I don't sing in rooms where people are treated like this. A sharp intake of breath moved through the audience. Dean set the microphone down on the stand and stepped away from it. Dean's foot touched the stage floor, and the room exhaled all at once. Not relief. The sound came out uneven, gasps, whispers, chairs scraping as people leaned forward, trying to see what was happening before it was explained to them. No one liked being confused in a place this expensive. The manager moved fast now. Too fast. He stepped fully onto the stage, smile already assembled, palms open in a gesture that meant let's not do this here. Dean, he said softly into the side of his mouth, you're under contract. Dean didn't look at him. He was watching Willie Hayes. Willie stood between the guards, frozen, unsure whether to move or remain exactly as he was. His shoulders were tense, braced for the moment someone decided patience had run out. Dean spoke again, voice steady, conversational, the same tone he used when telling a story between songs. Mr. Hayes served in the army, he said. Fought in Italy. Same places Americans bled so this country could brag about freedom. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The word Italy landed differently coming from Dean Martin. He came home, Dean continued, and helped build the entertainment business in this city. Played music in this very room while most of us were still trying to get booked anywhere. The manager's smile cracked. He glanced toward the back of the room where executives were already standing, faces tight, calculating. One of the guards leaned toward Willie, whispering urgently. Willie shook his head once. Controlled. He was tired of being moved. So here's my problem, Dean said. If Willie Hayes doesn't belong here... He paused. Just long enough. Then neither do I. The room erupted. Not applause. Noise. Arguments breaking out at tables. People talking over each other. Some standing. Some furious. Some thrilled. The sound of a place realizing it might be watching something unscripted. Herman Citron felt sweat gather under his collar. This was spiraling past damage control. This was headlines. This was calls from New York. Dean, Herman hissed from the wings. Please. Dean turned slightly. Enough to see him. Not enough to soften. I'm done, Herman. The words were quiet. They carried anyway. Dean stepped fully away from the stage, heading toward the stairs. The manager panicked. Wait, he said loudly, forcing authority into his voice. Wait, Mr. Martin. Dean stopped. The entire room leaned again, like a held breath repeating itself. The manager swallowed. He looked out at the audience. At the empty stage. At the two guards still gripping an old man who now had 2,000 witnesses. This wasn't about rules anymore. It was about leverage. Let him go, the manager snapped. The guards hesitated. Just a beat. Long enough to feel the pressure shift. Now, the manager added. Their hands released Willie's arms. Willie stood there, stunned, arms hanging loose, unsure what freedom looked like when it showed up unannounced. The manager turned back to Dean, voice tight but formal. Mr. Hayes is welcome to stay. Our apologies for the misunderstanding. Dean studied him for a moment, then nodded once. Thank you. No victory speech. No smile. He walked back to center stage, picked up the microphone, adjusted it like he'd just stepped away for a sip of water. Well, he said lightly, that's Vegas for you. Laughter rippled out, unsure, then grew as the tension broke. Applause followed, loud, sustained, charged with something heavier than entertainment. Dean glanced toward Willie. Front row's better, don't you think? A waiter hurried forward, guiding Willie toward an empty table near the stage. Willie moved slowly, still processing. People watched him pass now. Really watched him. Not invisible anymore. Dean waited until Willie sat. Then he lifted the microphone again. "From the top," he said to the band. Ken Lane nodded, hands shaking just enough to notice. The music started. After the show, the backstage corridor was quiet in the way storms leave things quiet. Crew members moved carefully, like any wrong step might restart it. Dean found Willie sitting alone on a crate near the loading dock, hat in his hands. "You all right?" Dean asked. Willie looked up, eyes bright but steady. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." Dean sat beside him. "You didn't," he said. "They did." Willie studied his hands. "Most times it's easier not to be seen." Dean nodded. "I know." They sat in silence, the kind that didn't rush to be filled. Finally Willie spoke. "You didn't have to do that." Dean exhaled smoke slowly. "Yeah," he said. "I did." The door to the loading dock creaked open, spilling neon light across the concrete. Herman Citron stood there, tie loosened, expression caught somewhere between relief and dread. He looked at Dean first, then at Willie, like he wasn't sure which one might explode next. "Casino manager wants a word," Herman said carefully. Dean didn't stand right away. He finished his cigarette, crushed it under his shoe, then rose. "Tell him he can wait." Herman nodded and disappeared without arguing. That, more than anything, told Willie how serious this had been. Dean sat back down. "You ever think about quitting music?" Willie asked quietly. Dean smiled without humor. "Every time someone tells me how lucky I am." Willie chuckled once, then shook his head. "You know what they told me when they let me go?" Dean waited. "They said the room needed a different feel," Willie said. "Didn't say what kind. Didn't have to." Dean leaned back against the wall, jaw tight. He'd heard the phrase before. Different feel. Different crowd. Different rules depending on who was standing in front of you. "I played with Basie once," Willie added, almost casually. "Short run. Best band I ever sat with." Dean looked at him, surprised. "That's so?" Willie nodded. 48, Kansas City. Nights you didn't want to end. For a moment, the Sands Casino disappeared. So did the noise. So did the rules. Herman returned, voice low. "They're nervous. Phones are already ringing." Dean stood. "Good." They walked down the hallway together, Dean in his tux, Willie in his worn suit, past framed photos of men who never had to use the back door. The manager's office smelled like cologne and fear. He didn't offer Willie a chair. Dean noticed. "This situation," the manager began, choosing each word like it might be recorded, "put us in a difficult position." Dean crossed his arms. "You put yourselves there." The manager tightened his jaw. "We have policies." "So do I." The manager glanced at Willie, then back at Dean. "This city runs on understandings." Dean leaned forward slightly. "Not threatening. Certain. Then here's a new one. Silence." "Willie Hayes is welcome anywhere I am," Dean said. "Front door." "Front row." "No explanations." The manager hesitated. Calculated. He saw the headlines. The ticket refunds. The empty showroom. Finally he nodded. "Fine." Dean straightened. "And one more thing." The manager sighed. "Of course." "You ever put hands on someone like that again while I'm on your stage," Dean said, voice even, "you won't need to fire me. I'll walk." The manager forced a smile. "Understood." Outside, Willie let out a slow breath. "You didn't have to do all that," he said again. Dean stopped in the hallway, turned to him. "Willie," he said, "I've watched men swallow this their whole lives. I'm done watching." The story didn't stop there. By sunrise, it had legs. Dealers whispered it over coffee. Musicians passed it along in dressing rooms. Casino owners pretended they hadn't heard while asking too many questions. Some called Dean reckless. Some called him brave. Most called their lawyers. Willie didn't become famous. He didn't want to. He took a job teaching piano on the west side, hands still steady, ears still sharp. Dean made sure his checks cleared faster than usual. Every time Dean played the Sands after that, Willie sat in the front row. Always the same seat. They didn't talk much during the shows. Didn't need to. Dean would glance down between songs. Willie would nod, and that was enough. One night, Sammy Davis Jr. leaned over to Dean during a set break. "Heard you caused trouble," Sammy said, smiling. Dean shrugged. "Depends who you ask." Sammy looked out at the room, then back at Dean. "About time someone did." Dean didn't answer. He didn't have to. The music came back up. The lights dimmed. And for the first time in a long while, Dean Martin sang without pretending he hadn't seen anything. Years passed the way they always did in Las Vegas. Loud on the surface, careful underneath. Officially, nothing had happened at the Sands. No press release. No apology. No mention of a stopped song or a halted show. On paper, September 12, 1962 ended like any other night. But people remembered. They remembered the silence more than the words. A room built on timing and control had lost both at once, and no one forgot how fast it happened. After that night, the changes didn't announce themselves. They slipped in quietly, the way lasting things usually do. Security guards hesitated before putting their hands on someone. Managers decided not to ask certain questions. Backstage passes appeared without the arguments that used to come standard. Nothing dramatic. Nothing heroic. Just different. Dean Martin kept performing in Las Vegas. Bigger crowds. Better contracts. More leverage than ever before. And he spent that leverage carefully. If Sammy stayed late, Dean stayed later. If a door closed, Dean opened it without comment. If someone was told to wait outside, Dean waited with them. Not to make a point. To remove one. People noticed. Musicians especially. Word spread the way it always does backstage. Quietly, face to face, without exaggeration. Dean never talked about that night. He didn't correct the story when it grew, and he didn't add to it when it shrank. When asked directly, he shrugged it off like it embarrassed him. "I just stopped a song," he'd say. Willie Hayes went back to his life. He taught piano on the west side, hands steady, patience endless. He worked with kids who had more confidence than skill, and adults who carried regrets they thought music might fix. He never chased recognition and never asked for credit. Dean made sure his checks cleared. Made sure his seat was waiting. Every time Dean played the Sands after that, Willie sat in the front row. Always the same seat. Always the same suit. He never waved. Never asked to be acknowledged. Dean always knew he was there. Sometimes, between songs, Dean would pause just long enough for Willie to look up. Just long enough for Dean to nod back. A moment that meant nothing to anyone else in the room. That was enough. In 1964, when the Civil Rights Act finally passed, newspapers called it progress. Inevitable. Long overdue. Dean read the headlines alone at his kitchen table, cigarette burning down between his fingers. "It didn't feel inevitable," he said quietly. Years later, someone asked Sammy Davis Jr. about that night at the Sands. Sammy smiled first. Then he shook his head. "People think courage is loud," he said. "They think it's speeches and fists and cameras." He paused. Dean didn't do any of that. He just refused to look away. Dean never argued with that version. Never claimed it. Never denied it. On his last night performing in Las Vegas, the applause lasted longer than usual. Dean stood at center stage, bowing slightly, wearing that familiar half-smile that never gave too much away. Before he left, his eyes went to the front row. Willie wasn't there anymore. Dean nodded anyway. Then he turned off the light.